But my man is here, and I want to go to him. We are joined with the one and only Mark Sleboda. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay this evening, this afternoon for you?
Tomorrow. Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show, and I'm alive. How the hell are you?
I am doing okay. It's always an honor and a pleasure to have you also. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Boosty, Boosty. If you put in Real Politic with Mark Sleboda, or if you just put in Mark Sleboda, he will appear with all of his thoughtful articles and all of his videos to follow. Mark, thank you for joining me. Question: why does Russia keep antagonizing NATO? I mean, they're flying drones over Kaya. I can't think of that woman's name. Kalis's house, apparently. It's freaking out Estonia. Then they're flying non-drones, drones without detonators, dummy drones into Poland. And of course, Poland goes immediately running to Trump saying, oh my God, they're flying drones. We need protection. We need help. Now, Trump is taking a weird tack with this. In one sense, Trump has said, we're going to take away military and support for the Baltic states. So no soup for you guys because you guys are worthless. You give us nothing. But for Poland, we will help you, Poland, especially if there continue to be breaches of your military space or your airspace. So why does Russia keep bothering Estonia and Poland?
Well, one could make the argument that Russia has every right to. In fact, Robert Kagan, the arch U.S. neocon, the husband of Victoria Nuland,
yep,
right? An unabashed, right, unrepentant, complete, geopolitical opponent of Russia, geopolitical opponent of Western hegemony. Yeah, he made the argument in the Atlantic that actually Russia has every right, and wonders aloud why they haven't before, why Russia hasn't before taken military action against NATO countries involved in supplying arms, intelligence, and basically commanding Ukrainian forces out of Reichstadt, German air base, as the New York Times openly admitted. U.S. generals are there running the Kiev's regime military, right, via proxy. And Kagan makes the argument in support of very different motivations, but he makes the argument that under previous historical precedent, Russia has every right, that these countries are de facto, NATO countries are de facto at war with Russia, and historical precedent, says that Russia has every right to consider them belligerents in the conflict and to strike back against them. Now, the only problem with that argument is there wasn't any actual strikes. I mean, and the idea that sending some decoy Gerbera drones without any explosives, composed, these things are made literally out of fiberglass, plastic, and plywood, right? And evidently, according to the pictures we were shown of what are supposed Russian Gerbera drones, launched by Russia into Poland, right? They are held together with duct tape. And I'm a full believer in duct tape. All right. I mean, I got some in my cabinet over here. It's got 1,000,001 uses. But I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Russia's probably not launching Gerbera drones held together with duct tape.
Right.
So Russia isn't making these provocations. These aren't. This is the EU playing the boy who cried wolf.
Yes.
Right. The Kiev regime and the Europeans, right? They sense that the Trump administration is once again wavering in what they regard as its expected support of this proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. And the Trump administration, has made clear, that it is dumping or dumping at least as much of the cost of this conflict as it can on the Europeans, right? And they put out all the reasons for this. They've said it openly, right? This is a division of labor. the U.S. needs to prioritize, and China is a bigger threat geostrategically to the United States, or at least to U.S.-led Western global hegemony, as they see it, than Russia. And the U.S. is already basically a couple decades behind their decision to pivot to Asia, because they just haven't been able to do so, right? From Obama, who first declared it, right, through Trump, Biden, now Trump again, they have not been able to do so, and they declared the intent to do so, although there's absolutely no sign that they're doing that or capable of doing that, because they're still getting bogged down in Russia, with Russia in Ukraine and in the Middle East. But that was their intent. They said it. Hegseth, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, now War, or once again War, laid it out clearly: division of labor, right? That strategic sequencing. The Biden administration imagined they were going to be able to knock Russia out and pivot quickly to China. And that, of course, did not happen at all during the Biden administration. And the Trump administration thought that they would, carrot and stick and bluff Russia into a peace on American terms to freeze the conflict in Ukraine, pivot quick to the Middle East, take out Iran. That didn't work out. And then pivot to China. And instead, of course, they've been bogged down now in both Ukraine and in the Middle East. And there's no sign of them pivoting in any type of military way to Asia. And now Venezuela, evidently, because they obviously, the division of labor wasn't, let's pivot to Asia, and then let's send a flotilla to Venezuela to take out drug boats. The problem is, of course, there's no unified foreign policy or grand strategic vision out of the Trump administration. There's different people with different pet visions and plans, presenting them to Trump on a regular basis, and Trump is vacillating as his mercurial, quixotic nature, 15 minutes in one direction, 15 minutes in another direction, and it's not 5D chess, it's clusterfuck. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing, and he's basically operating, off the seat of his pants, pivoting one direction, pivoting the other, depending on who presented the best argument to him in the last 15 minutes. That's where U.S. foreign policy is. So, but that is where the Europeans are. They feel abandoned, and one of the clear signs of that you mentioned is the Trump administration announcing it was going to end some types of military assistance, particularly training, to the Baltic states, to frontline states against Russia, particularly the Baltics. And the reason for that is simply the Trump administration feels the Europeans are perfectly capable of paying for and conducting that training. That's just one of the things that they've written off. It's not that they don't believe that the Baltic states deserve military training, right? It's that they think the Europeans should pay for it. That's it's not any type of gift to Russia. It's just another bill to the Europeans. That's all. And the Europeans are extremely upset about this, the Baltic nations in particular, and they're expressing their bewilderment and their outrage at what they perceive as their abandonment by the United States, which really isn't that anyway. So that's just Trump being Trump.
Yeah, they're not.
Yeah, and they are creating the drones was almost certainly a Kiev regime false flag through some combination. I believe it was actually a combination of three different things. One, electronic warfare, diverting several of Russia's drones during a strike that focused on Western Ukraine off course, which is, they can be captured, but, particularly, let's say, Gerbera, low priority reconnaissance drones or decoy drones, right? That they weren't even reconnaissance because they didn't even have any reconnaissance packages. They were just decoys, right? Some combination of that. some combination of a few of them probably captured previously. These decoy drones are all over Ukraine, right? Because they're launched amidst flights of Garans, and when they run out, they just drop, right? Because they're just decoys. They have no value, right? So they litter Ukraine with Gerbera drones. And they don't really do any damage when they fall. I mean, anything falling from a great enough height, can, I don't know, take out a chicken coop, for instance, although not in this particular case. So some of them were this, right? They were captured and they were launched from Western Ukraine, right? Well beyond into Poland, well beyond the normal range of these drones, right? And then the third one is probably some of them were literally just carried into Poland on the back of a truck and placed on a chicken coop in Poland, right? And then it was set. I believe it was some combination of these three things to create enough of an incident, right? 19, drones. And there was, it's rather interesting because the Poles were warned ahead of time by Belarus. Which is really, that was Russia, right? Russia communicating through Belarus that some drones were off course, through electronic warfare, and that they were moving over both Belarus, which evidently tried to target some of them, and shot some of them down, and then into Poland. And the Poles were warned ahead of time, and later admitted that they were warned ahead of time. But even so, they had a very difficult time bringing down any of these completely harmless decoy drones, right? Supposedly, there were 19 of them in the air, right? I can't confirm that. But they claim to have only brought down 4 of them, right? And the rest, presumably, just crashed on their own eventually because they would have been out of fuel. They used expensive missiles, including U.S. provided AIM air-to-air missiles to bring these drones down, right, at a cost of several $1 million, right, and for the cost of a handful of drones that probably cost a few $1,000s to put into the air, right? These decoy drones. So right away, several things were punched home to NATO at the same time. One, their air defense sucks and has no ability to resist Russian drones, not even completely harmless decoys, much less an actual Russian drone attack, which, Der Spiegel last week had a cover with Putin as the drone warrior, right? For over a year now, we've been told that Ukraine is a drone power, and Ukraine is making so many drones and is so innovative with drones, and drones are going to make up for all of the artillery and tanks and everything else and men that the Kiev regime doesn't have and win the war for them. But suddenly there's an admission that it's actually Russia that is the drone power because they're capable of innovation beyond the level of the Kiev regime. And much more importantly, they're capable of industrial production on a mass scale. Right. And they have the experience, the know-how, they're light years in terms of conflict ahead of the West in integrating drones into their forces and using them effectively. And now there's a sudden realization by NATO because of these decoys, how vulnerable they are. For one thing, they've given almost all of their air defense to Ukraine, where it has the Kiev regime in Ukraine, where it's been destroyed. And they have no missiles, right? They don't have enough interceptors for what air defense they have left. And they realize, what a difficult time. The Kiev regime is still making claims to be bringing down 80 to 90% of the drones and missiles that Russia launches, which is just absolute Baghdad Bob level propaganda. And the Europeans are suddenly only bringing down 4 out of 19 slow moving styrofoam and fiberglass decoys, right? This has been a shock. And then we've had these couple of other incidences, right? 2 weeks ago, we had von der Leyen. We had this hoax perpetrated that von der Leyen landing somewhere in Eastern Europe Her plane, her GPS signal was jammed. This is just a story that was thrown out there and has been debunked by the EU, by the governments involved, right, at a level, but still the hysteria of it remains, right? It has not been erased by later factual admissions. This was an obvious point of disinformation presented as part of a campaign to present as if Russia is provoking Europe, is taking actions against Europe. Another incident, some lone Russian drone apparently flying over Romania, also completely untargeted for no purpose whatsoever. Didn't hit anything, didn't strike anything, wasn't capable of doing so. And this was almost certainly another Ukrainian provocation. And now, most recently, in the last few days, we had these claims out of the Baltics that Russia sent several MiG fighter jets soaring over Tallinn, over the capital of Estonia, right? Only it turns out, of course, that that's not the case, that these jets supposedly were near the Estonian air defense identification zone, which, of course, is out into international airspace through a narrow international and sea corridor through the Baltic Sea. There's no legality to an air defense identification zone, right? Taiwan's air defense identification zone covers a third of mainland China, for instance, right? Things have no legality whatsoever. The U.S. is a big fan of them, but they don't mean anything, right? They're just, we would prefer planes contact us if they fly in this area, but there's no international legal bearing. And the Baltic Sea, it must be said, is a very tight space. There is a very narrow corridor, right, between all of the countries around there that is, delineated as international traffic for both ships and aircraft through there. And Russia was making part of a routine transfer of aircraft from Russia to the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, which lies, of course, over towards Poland, passed over the Baltics. And there is a rock in the middle of the Baltic Sea off the coast of Estonia that is permanently uninhabited. If you look pictures of it, it is literally a rock that has a few buildings, right, which are like utility shacks, and I believe so. It looks like some type of radar tower or something like that. There's no permanent inhabitants there, but that is how they claim the extent of their air defense identification zone there. But again, it has no legal bearing. And suddenly it became, in the Western media, Russia is flying fighter jets over Tallinn. And it led to all sorts of absolutely Kafka-esque absurd statements. All these things like, we should shoot those fighters down, right? With what?
Couldn't shoot down drones.
What? They have no air force, right? They don't have any air defense. Right. And if you dared to shoot down a Russian plane, then you're at World War III, and your little yappy dog routine is going to get real old real quick, because the Baltics would then be on the front line and would have to be targeted by Russia. But that seems to be what some people want. Some people desperately want. Now, the ultimate goal of all of this is a desperate cry of attention, the little boy crying wolf, to Trump, to try to grab Trump's attention, focus, and presumably the level of engagement they want, right? They don't necessarily expect any one incident, right, of these type of, provocations and false flags and the like to result in Trump suddenly come and
Article 5.
Going to put thousands of U.S. troops and equipment and so on, and redouble his efforts to follow the Biden path in Ukraine and so forth. But the strategy is enough of these things will create pressure on Trump over time. Pressure within his administration, pressure from the Europeans, pressure with Congress and the media in the United States, and it's a lot of pressure, right? Because why? Because they want the U.S. to go to war with Russia, or to present enough of a backing of the Kiev regime that Russia would be afraid and would just stop. Which I don't know where they get this. After 3.5 years, Russia has shown no sign and no reason that it should fear
Right.
U.S. backing of the Kiev regime, because they've beaten everything that the U.S. can throw at it, economically, militarily, diplomatically, hands down. But that is where they are. I mean, they don't really have any plan, right? Their plan is just to keep the Kiev regime alive as long as possible and hope for some type of miracle, some type of black swan event, Trump to get out of office, or to die, or to choke on a chicken bone, or whatever it is. Not necessarily that bringing JD Vance to power would
help their cause.
Yeah, would help their geopolitical cause any. But that's where they are. It's a boy crying wolf regime, saying, oh, the terrible Russians, the Russians are coming, right? It's a repeat of this Cold War era type of hysteria over again. And yeah, the Russians are coming to Ukraine because you overthrew the government there and put in an anti-Russian government. And that threatened the ethnic Russia and Russian leaving people of Ukraine, and threatened Russia's security, right on their doorstep, by trying to create a NATO battle platform against Russia. And Russia, after years of, I believe, naively trying a diplomatic track and pleading reason to NATO, which Putin himself has admitted was a mistake, and that he was, led down the primrose path by Merkel and others with the Minsk agreements and everything else. That's why Russia is there. Russia's not coming to the Baltics. Although, if you keep provoking Russia, right, by waging a proxy war against Russia, Russia has every right, to strike. According to Kagan, right? Don't listen to me. Listen, if you don't want to trust the American who immigrated to Russia, right? On this matter, trust the arch U.S. neocon who says, yeah, the Russians have every right to. If I were them, I would have already attacked Poland and the Baltics, right?
Yep.
That's the argument he recently presented. Now, he was on the way to presenting that the U.S. should go to war with Russia, but I mean that was the
way he was coding it.
Weird logic that he used to arrive at that decision. So, and it's something that I have said, repeatedly. As soon as this was coming out, I said, well, Russia has every right to. In another interview I did last week, there was suddenly a deluge of Polish comments coming from Polish people, jumping on, how dare I say that Russia has the right to strike Poland, but did not. Right. Now Kagan is saying the exact same thing that I was saying last week, which is ironic.
Yeah. He was opining. He was like, I don't know why they waited up until this point to do this. It's like you're just opining this, right?
If I were them, I would have already done this, right?
Yeah, I would have hit them already. We would have already been at Third World War. He was very cavalier about nuclear oblivion, which is wild.
Yeah, he seems to think that nuclear oblivion only affects Russia somehow. I
it's so bizarre. Yeah, it's such a bizarre read. So this is effectively false flags with the notion of trying to not necessarily provoke an Article 5, but to get Donald Trump more involved in the war.
Yeah,
Donald Trump seems like he's losing interest in this. We need to somehow get him back in. And on cue, Zelensky, with all of this data, well, look, they dropped a bomb on a house in Poland, which wasn't a Russian bomb, but okay. He's going to present it that way.
Days later, it turns out not to have been a Russian bomb. It's one of their own air defense missiles, expensive AIM air defense, not air defense, air-to-air missists, launched presumably by probably an F-16, maybe by an F-35, that was, used to attempt to bring down one of these Gerbera drones. Only its guidance system didn't work very well and hit a theoretic. Actually, it seems it was an abandoned house in Poland. Right, it did not explode. Right, it just crashed through the roof. But for days, it was. I mean, we literally had the Polish representative at the United Nations with a Colin Powell moment, holding up a picture of that house, and just not even a day later, it emerged in the Polish press. Oops, actually, that wasn't the Russians. That was our missile that did. That wasn't a Russian drone. It was our missile that did that. Right, almost repeating an incident that occurred back in late 2022 when a supposed Russian S-300 missile hit a pig farm in Poland, and only later was it admitted, well, actually it was a Ukrainian air defense missile that hit this Polish pig farm and not the Russians at all. So we're just repeating again. This is like Groundhog's Day almost.
Yeah, but this time it's intentional. That's the catch.
Yeah, this time it was could have been intentional back then. We don't necessarily know that.
That's fair. I mean, it killed somebody. I mean, it killed like the farmer and his wife or something like that. It killed like two people.
They care? Yeah, they killed a couple of people.
Yeah. I guess my point is Zelensky is on cue. Is coming to New York, and he's going to apparently meet with Donald Trump on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. And of course,
them and Al Qaeda.
Yeah, well, the irony, by the way, of the head of Al Qaeda looking at the New York skyline, that's amazing, right? It's like, which house? I mean, which building? But he's imagining the buildings that they took down. Yeah, that's ironic. That's super ironic. But yeah, Zelensky's going to be there.
It's not ironic. It's obscene. It's disgusting.
With a certain irony about it. I mean, Donald Trump was shaking the guy's hand who was chopping off the heads of Americans, for God's sake, and saying he has a good guy, a good-looking guy, strong history, a strong history of doing what? This is kind of like the Civil War, right? It's like a freedom to do what? Freedom to hold slaves. But I guess my point is Zelensky's going to be there, and he is going to, of course, be armed with this data that who knows if Trump has even heard of at this point, and is going to present us to Trump with the argument, and apparently a few European leaders are going to be there also, begging Donald Trump to what? Get more engaged? Get more engaged how? This is the thing that I'm unclear about. What is he?
Weapons and money. Weapons and money. That's
money and guns.
Yeah. I mean, troops would be even better, of course, but that they don't expect that at this point. But their primary concern. The Kiev regime is saying they need $120 billion next year just for the military to continue the conflict, and no one has an idea where they're going to get anything even close to that. So
there is a place that they have been talking about, effectively stealing the Russian money.
Yeah, stealing the Russian. Yeah, that's the only place that they really have to do it.
Do you think they're going to do
that? I think eventually they will. Sure.
Even though,
yeah, I mean, it's international legality, the rules of the road that they created for state capital and everything. No, they make up the rules. Eventually, they will forego them and take whatever credibility and international reputation damage as reliable bankers of countries' money that they have, right? Because everything to spite Russia. Right, everything. Right, if they have to tear apart their own international system to do it, they've already done that by weaponizing SWIFT and everything else. They will eventually go down this path because they have increasingly limited options. Right, the European economies are not in a good situation. Right, Germany is in recession. France and the UK, their own ministers have in both countries have suggested that the country's financial situation is so bad, they're facing bankruptcy, and they may have to consider taking out IMF loans, which the IMF actually doesn't even have the money for that, just to stabilize their economies. Yet they're still finding billions of their taxpayers' euros and pounds and whatnot to provide to the Kiev regime on a regular basis. And the announcement was made quietly in the last few days as well, reported by Reuters, that the Trump administration has approved its first new of its own weapons packages for Ukraine. Only supposedly it is the European members of NATO who are paying for this, right? It's not a huge package. It's 500 million. And we don't know exactly what it contains yet. But at the same time, we have also been told that the U.S. has stopped provision of Patriot interceptors and systems to Europe because they've realized that they don't have enough, right? They don't have enough for Ukraine. They don't have enough for Europe. And anything they give to the Europeans at this point will probably eventually be just sent on to the Ukrainians anyway. They don't have enough to defend Israel. They certainly don't have enough for any war with China in the Pacific. I've said it many, many times. The Achilles heel of the U.S., of their entire geopolitical position and their hegemony in military terms at this point, is air defense. They have a serious air defense deficit, both in the quality of what they have, Patriot, and you could argue THAAD systems, but also in their capacity to produce interceptor missiles to use it. They just don't make enough of them. 600 a year, right? That's where Raytheon is right now. That's their production. That's it. And that's not enough to meet their own demands, and Ukraine and Israel and the Europeans and all the Gulf states and everyone else who uses the Patriots. Ultimately, that is the reason why Trump had to stop the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, is because they didn't have any more air defense missiles. I was only shocked that they launched it because I knew they didn't have enough to launch it. And everything was, I guess, gambled on the fact that this Iranian decapitation strike would regime change Iran right away. As soon as that's not the case, and they faced looking at a long-term, long-range strike, war of attrition, they're like, tap out, drop some bombs, declare victory and a ceasefire, and go home. Because they didn't have enough air defense missiles to carry through a war, because Iran simply has too many missiles and drones at this point, a long-range strike capability that they never possessed before, that threaten not only all of Israel, but all of the U.S. military bases and allies throughout the Middle East. And so they had to tap out of that one. That is why I am very suspicious of claims that the U.S. and Israel could go to a war with Iran again, right, in the next few months. And because, again, they have, with what air defense missiles are they going to do it? They don't have enough. Now, the only way, again, is some other type of Mossad operation, decapitation strike, regime change, Mujahideen calc. But they can't wage a long-range strike war against Iran in the Middle East right now because they don't have the air defense missiles. It seriously limits their military options, right? And
I hear you. I hear you. A rational government would listen to you.
They're not a rational government. That's the problem.
I think the problem goes deeper. I mean, it's industrial base. Like, this is not the Second World War U.S. I mean, they are shuffling. The weapons that they were given to Ukraine were being shuffled around European capitals. It wasn't like they were producing them in a way, in numbers that could support all of these wars. It was, hey, Poland, give Ukraine your weapons. Hey, and Netherlands, give Ukraine your weapons. Well, we don't want to give Ukraine our weapons. Do it, goddammit. In which case they would give them weapons. They were shuffling those things around. So I hear you. I hear you.
They burned through everything in repeated conflicts with the Houthis, both with the Saudis, war against the Houthis in Yemen, and then multiple Biden and Trump, bombings of Sana'a, of Yemen, that resulted, of course, in them firing and then wasting Patriot and other, at sea air defense system missiles to defend against that. And then the conflict in Ukraine, right? And then renewed conflict in the Middle East with Iran itself. And suddenly, alarm bells, that level of Patriot interceptors, of PAC-3 interceptors in the Pentagon stockpiles, red lights going off, critically low, critically low, critically low. And that's where they are now, because the production rate of them is so low, and Raytheon can't ramp it up. They've been talking about the low rate for 2 years at least now. Raytheon has, certainly anyway, and they still haven't been able, by all accounts, by their own accounts, to significantly ramp up production. They ramped up production from 550 to 600 supposedly. That's not going to solve their problem, right? They need multiples of 600 produced a year, like 10 times that produced every year. And Russia is, in terms of air defense missiles, right? Russian air defense system is now the most, we've seen the quote unquote Iron Dome, which is really, the David's sling, David's Goliath, David's boomerang, because it swings back on itself and hits its own launchers. Right.
Right.
It's it just is not what it was cracked up to be, and the only proven air defense system in the world right now, interconnected, multi-layered air and electronic warfare defense system, is Russia's.
One last question on this. Russia's getting hit on the oil sands over and over and over again.
Sure.
Again, this is something that they just believe they can absorb and keep on moving forward.
Yeah, they are. The Kiev regime is sending drones, occasionally missiles, although not some in quite some time. And Russia seems to have targeted and destroyed the Kiev regime's domestic ballistic missile capability, the Sapsan sites, and we've heard a lot about this Flamingo, which may actually be a British Emirati missile, but we haven't ever seen one being utilized, so forth. So it's mostly just drones. And Russia is big, and they have a lot of soft targets. Oil refineries are huge, and they're everywhere. And the Kiev regime is getting through its licks with drones, right? Even Russia has a great air defense and electronic warfare, but they can only protect so many things.
Yeah,
they're getting through, and they're hitting refineries. But for the most part, these are small FPV drones that are getting through, or FPV drones, or small strike drones. They're not carrying large explosive packages. Not enough of them are getting through to cause systemic damage to any one site. They're getting through. They're causing an explosion. They're causing some damage. The fires are put out. The Russians are very good at repairing these things and restoring capacity in a very short amount of time. And yes, they believe, compared in relative terms to the damage they are doing to the Kiev regime every night on a nightly basis, which is many, many multiples of that. Right. Including just last night, I saw an oil refinery in Ukraine hit. Another one. This is, along with all of the other military industrial sites and everything else, military sites and everything that the Russians are hitting. It's a war of attrition, right? It's a war of attrition on the ground, but it's also a long-range strike war of attrition occurring on a nightly and sometimes daily, because sometimes they're launched during the day as well via drones and missiles. And yes, Russia thinks that it can weather that. And I know there's a repeated attempt to try to blow out of all proportion, like Russians are all over the country are queuing for gasoline, and then Russia's completely out of oil. All these ridiculous it's the same thing as Russians have no missiles, Russians have no tanks, Russians are fighting with shovels, Russians have all of these ridiculous Western mainstream propaganda lies and exaggerations that we have heard about Russia's impending downfall, over the last few years. And this is just another incident in this case. They're blowing something out of all rational proportion. To an absolute ridiculous degree, and it's just, we wish this were the case. That's where it is.
Yeah.
It's not saying that no damage is being done to Russia. It's simply that Russia is able to regenerate that damage on a regular basis. It is an acceptable level of damage they are incurring and repairing regularly in a very serious war of attrition that is occurring in the air as well as on the ground. And
Thank you for that.
people are routinely saying, why is Russia taking so long? Because this is the reality of combat against a peer near competitor in the real day. This is not Hollywood, right? This is not the U.S. beating up on an isolated, unsupported third world country, somewhere in the Middle East. This is not Call of Duty. This is real warfare where Russia is in a proxy war against not only all of NATO, but all of the collective West in a war, a very brutal, bloody, protracted war of attrition that is beyond the imaginings, not only of the people who don't understand, but even me. I mean, it's beyond all of our understandings, the real scope and the cost of all of this.